Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Current. This is the North Central Region Water Network's Speed Networking webinar series. I'm Rebecca Power. I'm joining you from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and I will be moderating the session today. For those of you that are not familiar with the North Central Region Water Network, we are an extension-led collaboration among land-grant universities and our partners in the Upper Midwest. And we are pleased to bring you a conversation today about conservation finance. We're just dipping a little bit into this big issue and hoping to, with you, expand the conversation about innovative ways to pay for critical conservation needs that have historically been outside of common market frameworks. Before we introduce our speakers, just a few notes to everyone about the way these sessions work. And you can see those on your screen, hopefully. We will be asking you to submit your questions in the chat box. The chat box is located in the purple Collaborate panel in the lower right-hand corner of your webinar screen. Should be a little purple tab there. We will get to those questions after both of our presenters are finished, and we try to leave a good amount of time because we know you all have a lot of expertise out there, and we want to be able to have everyone have access to that expertise as well as the expertise of our presenters. A phone-in option can be accessed by opening the session menu, which is in the upper left-hand corner of your webinar screen. And you can select use phone for audio if you're having trouble with the audio. Okay, on to our presenters. First, we will hear from Ellen Tarquinio from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She is at their Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center. Ellen will be giving us an overview of the valuable resources offered by the center and a few successful funding and financing strategies that have been used to reduce nutrients from stormwater, non-point sources, wastewater, and the like. Next, we get to hear from Ryan Smith of the Delta Institute and Greg Olson of the Sand County Foundation, who will be discussing a recently released report that they co-authored on pay-for-performance approaches to conservation funding. So with no further ado, let's get on to our presentations. I'm not going to read all of Ellen's introduction there, but she obviously has a lot of experience with US EPA and others in the water arena. So welcome, Ellen.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on this webinar. And I'm really excited to talk to you all and maybe share a new resource that some of you aren't as familiar with. As Rebecca said, I work for the EPA in DC, and I work for a relatively new center. A couple years in the agency. We started really as we call it a think-do tank, just a few years ago. And so for federal government standards, that's really new. And what we were created to do was to really focus on some of the problems that were out there for infrastructure, for water systems across the country. We started again, focused really on some of the financing and financial challenges that are out there for water infrastructure. But as the center grew and people became more and more aware that there were financial needs in the water sector that were well beyond just infrastructure, so did the mission of the center. So what we do now is we really focus on how we can work with communities, whether that's drinking water, wastewater, stormwater. We're now working in this conservation finance world because that's a lot of what we do. We're working with non-point source programs, different watershed communities to focus on really these different areas: research, advising, innovative approaches to financing, and how we can network with folks. The center is really a resource. So what we try to do is, again, work with stakeholders across the water sector to let them know about different funding mechanisms that are out there, to work with them a little bit on what are the best ways that they can bring in money to help solve the water challenges that they're facing, look at innovative new approaches. We are really focused on how we can leverage private sector funds, look at market-based solutions, look at performance contracting, and how we can bring more money to the table and make the best use of what little is out there to help solve all of these challenges. We do work on the ground with a lot of different partners. Again, I said we're in DC. We're a pretty small group. So what we do is we use the money that we have to fund different partners around the country to help work with communities on the ground. And we travel a lot to do workshops, which I'll talk a little bit about, so that we're making sure that we're addressing the needs of the community. We try to focus all the work that we do on what people are asking for, who are actually on the ground trying to deal with these water challenges. So these are a couple of the different programs that we've recently funded and worked with folks to address. The Community Assistance Resilience and Excellence Program, what we shortchange and call Water Care, was really focused on some pre-development work. So pre-development funding is often really hard for communities to get. So we wanted to try and fund pre-development programs to help get communities a little bit farther in their infrastructure work and show the importance of actually funding those activities. We are doing a ton of work on affordability, making sure that when communities and when utilities are looking at what the rates are, that they're done in a way that really enhances everyone being able to have access to clean, safe drinking water, regardless of their income or economic status. I mentioned, technical assistance partners, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what they are, but we do fund and work with a lot of technical assistance partners across the country to make sure that people have access to folks on the ground who can really focus on the challenges that they're facing there, that can get to them, that can work with them on developing reports, doing assessments on nutrient control programs in their area, funding some of those nutrient BMPs that are out there, funding energy use efficiency programs, a lot of different ways that these technical assistance partners actually go to communities and work with them directly to address their needs. And a lot of the things we do is actually build tools that people can go to the website, download, take on their own, and use to help them make better financial choices. One of the things that we heard from people immediately, and maybe you guys have the same thoughts, is there is so much information out there on the internet. Federal programs are a mess. It is so hard to figure out what we need, what we're eligible for, what programs are out there, what we can do. So one of the first things that we did at the center is we actually went and developed this water finance clearinghouse. And this is really, it's a website. It's an interactive, we think it's easy to navigate website. We tried to design it so it'd be easy to navigate to really help communities locate information and resources to help them make better informed decisions about how to finance some of their water needs. The clearinghouse has two different searchable databases. One is the available funding sources that are out there for water infrastructure. So, what programs are out there. You can search by your state. You can search by topic area. You can search by a number of different things that really will just give you a list of what programs are out there, covers the eligibility of the programs. Are you an eligible group? If you're not, it's not worth applying. So we wanted to make sure that was right up there front and center. Cover some of the amounts that are there, information on how to apply, and where possible, we did some case studies too of people who have used these different programs and the benefit they've seen from it. The second database that we have in the clearinghouse contains resources such as reports, web links, webinars on different financial mechanisms and approaches that can help communities access capital to help meet their water infrastructure needs. So it basically will show you, okay, well, what are some of the reports? There's a lot of information on there about case studies. And then we wanted to go even a little bit farther. We know that, reading a case study is great and all, but it's maybe not so helpful. Reports are sometimes very huge, and people often don't have the time to actually sit down and read it and learn it. So what we did is we developed learning modules And these are all up on, again, that clearinghouse website. And the learning modules basically walk you through in this interactive way. They provide information on different financing resources and funding topics. The topics were brought to us for people who really wanted to learn about these specific issues. So they're very tailored and very focused on specific themes to help people finance water. So the first one that we have up there is the State Revolving Fund. We have one on WIFIA, which is a new infrastructure funding program that people are applying for and they're really interested in. And then we have one on financing septic systems, so how you can actually finance if you're a homeowner seeking information to support your operation and maintenance, repair, construction of new septic tanks. So we have that up there. There's a couple more that are on their way. They're kind of going through our federal process to get cleared, but one is on financing municipal and agricultural partnerships. There's one that's going to be up there on financing stormwater management, and then one on disaster and resiliency initiatives that are going to be coming out, within the next several months. There's a whole bunch more behind that, a little bit farther back, but you'll see my contact information on here, and if there's really particular topics that you want to see, feel free to send me an email and say, I'd really like to get more information on this one issue. And that's how we take these topics to develop learning modules to hopefully help people learn a little bit more about what options are out there for them. So I mentioned that we go out and we do sort of interactive work with communities, and we do that usually by theme. So this year we really are focused on stormwater financing. Stormwater is a huge, huge issue across the country. I'm sure all of you are aware it's often cited as one of the biggest pollution sources in our water. It's often non-point source. There's some point source issues out there as well for stormwater. It's a huge topic, and people are struggling with how do we actually finance stormwater control measures in our community. And we have a lot of interest all around the country. There's local challenges. So what we're doing now is we're going out and we're holding these stormwater workshops around the country. And we are going out to communities and talking to them about the challenges that they're facing, showing them some possible ways that they can finance stormwater in their area, showing them maybe some new modules like, looking at alternative delivery mechanisms, looking at how they could do environmental impact bonds to help finance some of their stormwater issues. And then looking, for smaller communities where that's not an option, how they can maybe streamline some of the grant applications and different mechanisms they might not have thought of. We're, holding these again across the country, and here's a list of where we are actually having these different workshops. If you are interested in attending any of them, if this is an issue that you are challenged with or passionate about, feel free to send me an email, and we will send you the registration links for these different sessions. We certainly want to hear, the voices of folks around the country who are struggling with this, and we know that a lot of different people are. So that's our theme for this year, and then our theme for next year is we are going to be doing regional water finance forums. We did a number of these a couple years ago, and we're going back and going to hold 3 to 4 finance forums across the country that really focus on agriculture and nutrient reduction strategies, how you can use alternative finance mechanisms to address some of these challenges from non-point source and ag and just how nutrient reduction can be addressed, whether that's some market-based solutions, trading mechanisms, other ways that people can really look at ways that they can fund some of the projects and BMPs in their area. If you are interested in participating in them, again, shoot me an email and we'll add you to the list to those next year. So again, I'm doing a brief overview of all the things that we do because we're in a whole bunch of different areas. You can see this is a list of some of the webinars that we've been doing over the past year. These are all up on our website, and these are the topic areas. There's a number of different webinars for each of these series. So this is the general topics, and there's a lot if you go to our website for each of these different areas. We capture all of them, so they're recorded, the presentations are there, and you can see all the different speakers if you wanted to follow up and get more information from them about some of the different ways that they funded this work. I talked a little bit about the technical assistance providers that we have, and the big ones that we work with at the Water Finance Center are the environmental finance centers. So the Water Finance Center, which is EPA, funds a lot of the work of the environmental finance centers. And these are university-based organizations that, again, are on the ground. They focus on different topics. Each one of the finance centers has a different real theme that they work with, and that's based on the needs of the communities that they're in. We have 10 of these across the country. You can see here, the slide is a list of those 10 finance centers, again, that are around the country that really, again, work with communities. They work directly with the communities to help address some of the water finance challenges that they face. They do expand beyond water, so they do a lot of different work. They are a really, really great resource. They do have, again, funding from EPA, and they also work directly and get some funds with local communities as well. And they, again, have these different themes. There's a lot of great resources, and all the tools that they develop are up on the website for everyone to go and download. If you haven't used them and you have some challenges, particularly in the water finance area, these are a really great resource, and I just encourage you to go and to look at some of the work that they're doing out there. So I wanted to end this really brief highlight presentation with some concrete things that we try to highlight. And, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or the CWSRF, I think a lot of people look at that, and it's almost the same evolution that we have as a center, where it started based on, finance for infrastructure. They were the construction grant program back, in the 70s when this first developed. And a lot of people still look at them in that same lens, where it's just hard infrastructure, gray infrastructure. But, one of the things that we do is we want to highlight that, this is a great resource that can be used beyond just these gray infrastructure programs. So over the years, you can see that there's $25 billion that has been used towards advanced wastewater treatment, but there's also $272 million that's gone towards agriculture best management practices, $468 million that's gone to cropland best management practices. There's a lot of different ways that the Clean Water SRF can be used for nutrient reduction. And that's really, again, to help address some of the huge nutrient pollution problems that are out there across the U.S. Can upgrade, again, some of the gray infrastructure, which maybe you guys know about, stormwater conveyance systems. A lot of the Clean Water SRF can be used for green infrastructure. It is an eligible expense, like bioswales, infiltration, wetland restoration. It can be used for riparian buffers, and even livestock waste management systems. So I wanted to give you guys just a couple of concrete examples, and a lot of these are up on the website. I mentioned that Clearinghouse has a lot of case studies, and these are some of them. But I wanted to highlight some of the ways that we are trying to promote this blending of using money that maybe has been used for traditional gray infrastructure projects towards some of the green infrastructure and nutrient reduction or non-point source programs. So the one that's up here on the slide is, Ohio's Water Resource Restoration Sponsorship Program. And sponsorships are definitely a thing that we're trying to promote and educate people about, that this is something that's out there, something that a lot of states have adopted, and more states are developing sponsorship programs. But here for this example, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District actually receives a discount on their standard rate for sponsoring some of the non-source projects across their district. So it saved them a lot of money by reducing their interest payments, and it's still done a lot of good by restoring some different floodplain areas and forested buffer, and it's linked, some green corridors. So there's a lot of different ways that some of these great restoration programs can be sponsored from, something that people look at as traditional gray infrastructure programs. Kind of a win-win for both. In this example, the city of Cocoa Beach really did a different program where they were able to use the Clean Water SRF and actually use it to match a 319 non-point source grant. And so it's a different way that these funds can be used to help address some different areas and bring in money, for the matching component of the 319 program. And in, this last slide, or the last example I'm going to walk through, this is a different program where, a lot of times people who are trying to implement BMPs don't want to come in and they don't want a loan. So there's a lot of ways that states can actually work with the state revolving fund and address some of the nutrient load issues by having principal forgiveness. And so, this is an example where a farmer in Pennsylvania actually got a $100,000 loan with 100% principal forgiveness to actually do a manure management project on his land. So it was a way that, a farmer who wasn't interested in going out for a loan was able to do that to get the money to actually do this really critical manure management program and have 100% principal forgiveness so that he wasn't taking on debt to do this conservation action. So with that, this is our website, the EPA.gov Water Finance Center. You'll see a lot of these different resources. Because this was, for us, a short presentation, I tried to cover it pretty quickly, but there's a lot more up there on our site. I encourage you to go to look at it, particularly to go to the clearinghouse, because there's a lot of really great resources out there. There's over, 500 different sources of funding for green infrastructure, for example, that's up on our site. You'll see my email is up here and the email address for our center. So please, again, feel free to reach out if you'd like to attend any of the different stormwater sessions that we've got over the next 3 weeks. And then if you're interested in being involved in some of the conservation finance nutrient forums that we're going to be doing in the next year. So with that, turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Ellen. And yes, I will second her comment. There is so much information up on their website, so many great resources. And we'll get to your questions for Ellen in a little bit after our next presentation. And also, of course, Ellen herself is a great resource. So thanks for agreeing to let folks contact you. And we'll move on to our next presentations. So again, welcoming Ryan Smith from the Delta Institute and Greg Olson from Sand County Foundation. And they are going to be talking to us about what pay for performance is and some keys to success based on a report and guidance document that they released not too long ago. So welcome to you both.
Yes, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to speak with everyone today. Again, this is Ryan Smith. I lead our land stewardship initiative here at Delta Institute. If all of you are not familiar with Delta, which I'm sure some of you aren't, we are a environmental nonprofit that works on environmental complex issues, specifically in the Midwest and the Great Lakes. So we really try to position ourselves at the intersection of sustainability and economic development. So, that could be in the agricultural sector, which we'll talk about today, into communities, built environment, really trying to come with solutions that can be scaled way past the pilots and the work that we're doing. So Greg and I, so I'll begin, and Greg and I will be speaking with you about a pay-for-performance guidance document that we co-authored with Windrock International through funds through the Great Lakes Protection Fund. This was funded to do a pay-for-performance project in the Milwaukee River watershed. But this guidance document includes much more information than what was just discovered in that pilot. There was about 9 or 10 pilots that the group has been working on over 20 or 30 years around pay-for-performance and water quality credit training. So taking all that information and aggregating it into this guidance document. So I'm going to start with a very high-level view of pay for performance, and then kind of dig in to some questions that we ask ourselves and that people should ask themselves when they are implementing a pay for performance program or a framework into a program. So here's the status quo, if you will. So I don't think I have to explain how federal USDA farm bills work, but it is a the majority of the programs like EQIP and CRP are pay for practice. So, you know, the farmer is paid a cost share amount, typically anywhere between 50, could be up to 100%. And then if there is a remainder, then that remainder is paid by the farmer to implement that conservation practice. I can't exactly remember who said it. I think it was Dave White, but also called these random acts of conservation as well. So just littering the landscape with conservation practices. So the farmer will implement the conservation practice, and there are no models or monitoring tied to the implementation of these practices through these specific programs, so we are uncertain how many nutrients or sediment is actually being saved from these practices being implemented. So pay for performance is not a new concept, right? So essentially what we're trying to do is tie a monetary amount to an environmental outcome. And so with a PFP alternative, the farmers will choose the most appropriate and cost-effective strategy for their farm. So that could be one practice, or it could be a multiple practices working as a system. Then practitioners would run science-based models, and in this case, predicting phosphorus loss. And so they would get a baseline, and then come up with a number of a phosphorus reduction. The farmers then would be paid for that reduction. So it's not a cost share amount. It's how much phosphorus that they are reducing, and a dollar amount would be tied to a pound or to a ton, you know, whatever unit that we're talking about. This can get a little confusing, this graph a little, because what we're talking about is a pay-for-performance framework, right? So this is kind of showing more with number 4 here, is if we tied pay-for-performance to a water quality credit trading scheme. So what's great about this type of framework is it could open different market opportunities for farmers. So farmers are not regulated, or most farmers are not regulated under the Clean Water Act. So this enables a non-point source, a farmer, to generate credits and then possibly sell them on a market to a regulatory entity, industry, or a wastewater treatment plant. So this definitely could open market opportunities. So this next slide here is just a simplistic graph explaining the program steps. So you meet with the farmers, so practitioners, soil and water conservation districts, watershed groups, meet with farmers to gather information, decide you know, what practices would like to be implemented. You would model the phosphorus or the nutrient loss from each field. Farmers would choose and implement those best management conservation practices, and then after verification, farmers would be paid per unit produced of nutrient reduction. So it sounds really simple, right? Sounds easy. Well, let's not get too excited. So in this guidance document, that we will share the information on how you can access the guidance document at the end, and Greg will share that information with you. But there's about 5 questions that we wanted to ask ourselves. A pay-for-performance framework is not a one-size-fit-all approach to reducing agricultural non-point source pollution. But as I think I explained, however, it can be a promising option to address water quality issues, but we have to stop and ask ourselves these 5 questions. And so I just want to quickly go over these 5 questions, and then I'll turn it over to Greg and explain his work with farmers in implementing this on the ground. So the first question we want to ask ourselves is, does a water quality concern exist in our watershed? To use this type of framework, there has to be a water quality concern. So it's designed, requires that a water quality concern exists, and by addressing and working with landowners under this type of program. So it's just having the knowledge that, if you're working in a HUC 8 or a HUC 10 or HUC 12, wherever, understanding that there is a water quality concern within that watershed. The second question is, do stakeholders acknowledge their contribution to the water quality problem? So in this case, is farmers. Do they understand they may or are a part of the problem, but more importantly, they can be a part of the solution. So really having buy-in. So talking, using experts on the ground to really explain to farmers of what the issues are. And for example, something that is really powerful around the country are farmer-led watershed groups that can help shine some light, I guess. We connect with people like us, right? So we want to create groups of farmers that then can communicate to other farmers. The third question that we ask ourselves is there local support for addressing non-point source pollution? So just not local support from stakeholders, but also local support from on-the-ground practitioners and urban communities as well. Different things drive different people, right? So we want to make sure that that all the concerns have been addressed and everyone understands, and we have that local support to develop a program like this. Are the appropriate tools available for carrying out a pay-for-performance program? This is essential. We need to make sure that we have the tools and the models, specifically the quantification models, calibrated and ready to go within these watersheds so we can quantify outcomes. So in general, we want to make sure that these models are accurate at the field level scale, very important because we're working with farmers at a parcel or a field level scale. Make sure that they are calibrated for that specific geographic area that we're working in. I think most importantly is that they're user friendly. And something, of course, that we always get is, another model, right, or another tool. So we want to make sure that it's accurate, that it's easy, and that it's friendly. With that, we want to make sure that it's flexible enough to simulate many best management practices, and not just in a silo either. Making sure that we can possibly model multiple practices at once. And making sure that these models and tools are sensitive to small changes in management. Example like a simple reduction in tillage. And the last one is, and this would be more around water quality credit trading, but are there regulatory drivers for pollutant load reductions? That would enable possible trades to happen or open up a market to trade offsets between a non-point source and a point source, such as a TMDL or other water quality standards. This is really important. For example, in the Milwaukee River watershed, we started this program in 2013. We are expecting the Milwaukee River TMDL to be released shortly after, and it wasn't released until after the project was over in 2017. So that was a little bit difficult to explain to farmers of what we're actually trying to do. So yes, it's very, very important. So I know that was quick and dirty. That was just kind of the high-level overview of PFP and the framework itself. And now I'd like to turn it over to Greg to talk about key points to success, some other barriers and challenges, and his experience working with farmers with this type of program.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, my name is Greg Olson. I'm the projects director for St. County Foundation. St. County Foundation, we're Madison. And primarily, we try to work with managers with political land approach. So I'm going to have to quickly go through a lot of this as we're running short on time.
Greg,
Can you hear me? Was there a problem?
Greg, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we're having trouble. Your audio is cutting in and out. If you could just check a chord or check something there quickly before you continue.
Is that better?
Keep going.
Keep going. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's keep going.
Okay. Okay. So quickly to go through this, I'm going to have to run through pretty quick. So what I'm going to talk about is key points to success in a pay-for-performance project related to work on the starting out first, partners. Understand roles, and objectives of partners. Ryan already talked about the TMDL issues we had and how we had a hard time getting the point sources involved in our project. But from another standpoint, you can also find that you're going to have a different set of goals and objectives that the farmers have from what the point sources has, and you need to actually find out ways to try to get them to be working together towards a common goal. And that does lead into the next bullet or numbered point I have here, and that is it takes a village. You need to build a watershed community. Everybody in this needs to understand that this is a joint effort. In essence, we need to get rid of the finger pointing and actually get to having common goals and objectives so that everybody's working towards the same end goal. We had some issues running along with this through the years of working in the Milwaukee River in particular, where in meetings where farmers and point sources were together, we actually found that farmers would continually bring up the combined sewer overflows and permit, losses into Lake Michigan. And also there was a particular wastewater treatment plant in particular whose staff openly stated during these meetings that farmers needed to be treated like misbehaving children when it comes to water quality issues. When you're dealing with that type of back and forth, there's not going to be an amicable connection that can get to an end goal. So we need to break that down. Next is an important concept, and that is trusting our two-way streets. To use a quote from a Kansas farmer I met earlier this year, how much is peace of mind worth? He was mostly talking about, the adoption on money, but in the discussion though, he brought up the fair weather programs and partners. And this follows with what I was just saying. Along those same lines, the permit holders that I talked to are very concerned about certainty. This is, from both the regulators and the farmers that are providing their needed compliance results. Bottom line, we need to create a process that builds trust between the stakeholders and creates a culture of commitment to goals and objectives for the entire community. So here, this is one of my favorite statements that I try to live by, and that is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Be deliberate. Setting things up right is going to save more time than anything. If you rush, you then have to spend time and resources fixing issues, which leads to delays in reaching your end goal. Also, there are enough hurdles that we can't see coming that we're going to have to deal with. The pay for performance project, our first analysis year, caused me a lot of headaches. I was told to move forward even though the project team couldn't agree on at what rate we wanted to pay out at. For that reason, we only had one farm that moved forward. Is the guy sitting next to me in the picture there. He said, "Trust you, I want to help." Through everything. Success requires a willingness to adapt, which follows suit with, again, the previous statement. There are many variables that we can't change or come out of the blue that will require us to adapt our approach. The biggest one out of our control is weather-related changes to how both the agricultural side and the point source side operate. Untimely or excessive rain and snowmelt changes the way both these entities operate. Also, market changes can cause adaptation in the way that the agricultural community operates. 2019 is an example of both these issues. Excessive spring wetness caused farms to make changes to everything they were doing, as well as issues in the markets. Examples are some of the fields didn't get planted at all. Others had changes in the planned crop, fertilizer applications changed, etc. The primary problem this brings to a pay for performance program is the modeled results. We do our best to create an annual plan for the farm that yields the best P-loss over the baseline condition. These months prior to the season's crop production, we're actually setting that plan, and then now the conditions change. And try to make adjustments to plan that can best get the reductions based on the change. This becomes very difficult as these changes usually have farmers rushing to make adjustments of their own to keep their operations viable, meaning that we don't have time to go over things with them or with us. So, and now the last one is something that I think is very critical, and it's going to lead into the next slide here, and that is, Brian already touched on quantification tools and picking the right ones, but it's also important that the staff you're using for quantification have an understanding and a very good way to communicate what's happening within that model. Farmers don't trust models in most cases, so that staff has to be able to overcome that particular hurdle. So this slide is actually an analysis of a bunch of different options we gave to farmers in the Milwaukee River project. And you can see that it's broken down by kind of categories of options that they had. And then it is a cost benefit effectiveness based on getting $25 a pound for their P-loss reduction, and then adding in an economic analysis of what it costs to do that change in activity. So farmers participating in the Milwaukee River Pay for Performance project earned $25 per pound of peat reduction, as I already stated. For example, one farmer reduced phosphorus loss by 183.1 pounds and earned $4,577.50. Compared to baseline levels, P-loss dropped about 40%. This graphic helps to make the point of the need for an approach that has quantification built into it. Let's look at the light blue lines here. If you actually see this, you can see that cover cropping actually was our most cost-effective and our least cost-effective options at times in this. And that had to do with a number of different things. You know, different types of cover crops. Were they doing multi-species, or were they doing a single, because that affected cost? We also have the activity used in planting and termination of those cover crops. And then the other one, which is actually critical to the quantification piece, is there were times that we saw phosphorus loss increased by putting cover crops.
Yeah, it did. I mean, well, what happened was, we were talking about it yesterday. I thought it was a.
Hello? Somebody? Okay. So this brings up another point. Single constituent or ecological suite approaches may overlook the overall value of the system that is being assessed. Let's say a point source is working with a farmer with the goal of meeting a P-loss reduction, and the farmer has a goal of creating a soil health system. Well, now which do we choose? Because if the P-loss goes up because of a cover crop, which is, where do we go? My apologies, I skipped over the slide there. Okay, quickly, the Pay for Performance project in the Milwaukee River was done in partnership between Winrock International, Delta Institute, and Sand County Foundation. It was funded by the Great Lakes Protection. The project yielded a pay-for-performance conservation how-to guide and a technical paper on using Wisconsin's SNAP Plus planning tool for pay-for-performance projects. The how-to guide can be found at any of the organizations I mentioned, websites with a search for pay-for-performance included, and then the technical papers available through Delta Institute. My apologies for going over, but we had some delays. I'm done. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Greg. And we had some sound difficulties there, but I'm glad we got you back for most of that. And now we'll go ahead with questions that I'll start with the ones in the chat box. And if any of you have questions that you have not yet submitted there, please go ahead and do so, and we will get to them. So the first question we have is from Tracy, and I think this question was asked during Ellen's presentation related to the regional stormwater workshops. And Tracy, if you're still on, you can confirm that or let us know if we've missed your question. So the question is, are materials from these workshops available on the web anywhere for non-attendees to use?
Right now they are not up there, but we will be putting them up there. The workshops are focused on a bit of a facilitated discussion, so we are trying to pull from people what their challenges are and give them feedback. What we're going to be doing is we will put the presentations up there for the sessions, and we will be putting the summary of notes. We have detailed note takers, so we'll be putting the summary of the recommendations people gave to us and a bunch of the different resources that are connected to their questions up on our website. And I can send that out to maybe Rebecca. We'll talk about how to get that information out once we do publish that after the last workshop.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. We'd be happy to help with that. And great. Chris asks, can you comment on green bonds? According to an article in Bloomberg News, it's a $136 billion market. And I think that would be for Ellen.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. See, Ryan has some thoughts as well, but you know, I will say overall we've definitely you know, had a lot of folks who do use green bonds or are promoting that. You know, what we've heard is certainly similar to what was out there in the Bloomberg article, that there is a huge market out there and that people are having more and more interest tapping into that. There's some challenges that they face, like scaling up projects so that it's a viable, larger project that would be eligible for bonds. You know, and one of the things that we're working with a lot of communities for are environmental impact bonds. So I will suggest that you're interested in green bonds, you also look at environmental impact bonds, because those are something that we're seeing, you know, more and more examples and more people interested in utilizing.
Thank you, Ellen. And Ryan, did you have anything to add to that?
Nope. She did a great job answering it. That's about my response as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. And on to Keegan. Do pay-for-performance models favor practices that are not as economically advantageous for a producer but highly beneficial for downstream users? For example, favoring a structural practice versus in-field nutrient management.
So yeah, Keegan, this is Ryan Smith. Thanks for that question. I guess that maybe your question wasn't around the economically advantage, but I think being a structural practice, or what I would consider a hard practice, maybe a filter strip or a bioreactor or a wetland, could actually be economically advantageous for a farmer, as long as these practices can be modeled through the tools that we would be using and would be recognized by the program. Absolutely, they could definitely you know, definitely be a part of a pay-for-performance project.
This is Greg Olson. Can everybody hear me? I don't know if I'm still having problems, but
you're good.
Okay. Keegan, yeah, one thing related to that, I've been dealing with some point sources and meeting permit requirements, and they, of course, would like to see the more structural practices being put in because it actually has insurance of long-term crediting, whereas a lot of the other stuff we're dealing with ag is, of course, on an annual basis, which puts a level of uncertainty in there. And from a cost perspective, I have to agree with Ryan. It's all going to depend on when, where, how you're putting it all in there. Just like what I was talking about with the cover crops, they can stray across the boundaries when it comes from a cost perspective or cost benefit perspective.
Great, thank you both. And a question from Katie. And this, I think, could be for any of our presenters. What states have nutrient trading programs in place?
I can start. Greg, you could follow up. The two predominant ones here in the Midwest, Wisconsin has one. They actually have 3 compliance option guidance for wastewater treatment plants and industries, and one of those is water quality credit trading. Greg could probably answer on how many times it's been used. I think it's only been a handful, maybe not even all 5 fingers, but Greg could answer that. And then Maryland also has a state trading program that I believe has only been utilized several times. So it's very important how these are set up, but outside the state, there are industries that actually have their own trading programs as well. One in Ohio, Alpine Cheese, which sits in Holmes County near Bowling Green, Ohio, has their own program where they trade offsets with farmers, and I believe it's about the same price as we explored and discovered with our Milwaukee River project. I think it was $30 a pound for both phosphorus and nitrogen. So pretty great for nitrogen credits there. Greg, are there any other states, or do you want to talk maybe a little bit more about Wisconsin?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, Wisconsin, there are more entities that are getting involved in trading, but we are seeing more traction in Wisconsin related to what they call the adaptive management option. And that's basically a program that's a watershed-based system that's based on looking at a long-term change in the actual concentration of your particular constituent in the river, or in the water body, I should say. Yeah, as for other states, I know Iowa's working on coming up with a trading framework, but I don't really know exactly where it's at. Somebody else might be able to speak more to that. Outside of that, I couldn't really comment on any other states at this point.
Ellen, anything to add?
The only thing that I would add is that, nutrient trading programs in states is something that EPA really is focused on right now and looking at, market-based solutions for nutrient reduction. And so, there's a bunch of memos that we've put out, and we are trying to work with the states to encourage more nutrient trading programs to be set up, similar to, what these guys were just talking about in Wisconsin.
Great, thanks. Okay, and a question from Rick. For Greg, it looks like you used at least 2 different prices for dollars per pound of P for the paper performance. How did you come to a price or prices?
Yeah, great question. Like as I hope you might have heard during the presentation, it was when I was cutting out a little bit. We were trying to determine that in our first year, and we kicked around everything from doing reverse auctions, to just looking at base pricing. And initially, what we decided to go with was we took a price of $32.50 initially, and that was based on the it's called the multi-discharge or variance option in Wisconsin, and that actually has $32.50 per pound of phosphorus going from the wastewater treatment plant to the land and water departments under that structure, without getting into more detail on it. So we decided that was a good base start, but then we actually moved to $25 a pound to try to be able to show that we could get results on a lesser amount, per pound. Hopefully
Okay,
that
great.
answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And Rick can follow up. We've just got a few more minutes here, but if he has any other questions, he can follow up with you directly. Brian asks, can you speak a little more to the monitoring and verification in the pay for performance concept? How are we able to measure performance? That's a big question for a short amount of time, but go ahead. Probably Greg, you could start this.
Yeah, so everything was based on modeled results, and of course, we were using models that had verification through monitoring, but in general, we're always going to have to run a modeled scenario because monitoring every farm field is just not practical, and it'd be extremely cost prohibitive. So in general, you look for a model that actually has good background and good monitoring connection to verification, and then you follow up with also doing heavy duty verification on the actual activities that are going on too, and that can actually be a very touchy thing to deal with from a staff perspective, because if you're doing something like a tillage reduction, you have to remember that all the farmers are tilling all the feed, they're all working at the same time, which means if you're trying to get out there and actually verify that day it's being tilled, that can be very, very difficult. But getting back to the modeled results, I would be a big fan of any program that actually pulled in maybe having some monitoring to calibrate the models within the program if the funding was available and the partners were willing.
And you mean probably within that watershed, I'm assuming. Okay.
Yes, on the actual things that are being modeled, yes.
Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you for that. And final question from Chris. What for change in cropping systems, less corn, more grass-fed dairy cows, or add hay to crop rotations? Maybe a little bit beyond pay for practice, but not quite pay for performance.
General agronomic changes were a big part of what we did in the pay for performance project, and it's a lot of what I do working with Sand County Foundation is trying to find ways to maintain that economic viability on the farm, and of course being able to find alternative cropping methodologies can actually be a good way to go. So yeah, we actually, under the Pay for Performance project, we did actually go into some of the conservation crop rotation type stuff where continuous corn soybean rotation. We worked with the farmer to add in a wheat into that rotation, which helped. And then I also had some cash grain operations that we helped to broker some deals with local dairies to bring alfalfa into steep slopes with high loss potential, because alfalfa being a perennial crop in essence actually can help in that situation.
Yeah, really quick, just to follow up on that. Thanks, Chris, for that question. It's something we think about all the time. And just to get on my soapbox for 5 seconds, these types of systems that you're mentioning and trying to integrate is what we need to get to more of a sustainable regenerative agricultural system, right? So yeah, that's something that we definitely want to start integrating into existing models. But also, back to Ellen's point about, EPA encouraging states to generate water quality credit trading programs, something that we also want to think about, which I think is amazing. There's some different consortiums and different platforms out there that are thinking about this as an ecosystem service, right? So, the majority of agricultural practices that are implemented also have different benefits. They have biodiversity benefits, they have soil carbon sequestration benefits, and there are markets for those. So how can we, create, there's an ecosystem service market consortium out there now that's exploring these types of markets and thinking about this as a system and just opening all these different market opportunities for farmers.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. And wrapping this up, thank you so much to Ellen, Ryan, and Greg, all three of our presenters. Excellent presentations, lots of resources available. Thanks so much to our participants too. a lot of expertise there coming out in the chat box, and I'm sure with other folks on the line that didn't submit questions. So we thank you for participating. You can go to northcentralwater.org to access the archived version of this webinar, and please share it with other folks that you think might be interested in the information. Our next webinar will focus on groundwater quality. So, you know, the conservation finance strategies that we heard about today, of course, can have potential benefit for surface water and groundwater, as well as other conservation needs that we have. And that webinar will be held Wednesday, October 9th, same time, 2 p.m. Central. So stay tuned for more details on our website for those presenters, and we look forward to seeing you back. Thanks so much.